Hello everybody, it's Tarun. Welcome to your 17th tutorial in the CSS for presentation course. In this tutorial, I will continue with the topic floating multiple elements. Okay, it is perfectly fine to float multiple elements on a page, even within a single element. In fact, it is one way to turn a list of links into a horizontal menu, as we will see in a moment. When you float multiple elements, there is a complex system of behind the scenes which is rendering the rules that ensures floated elements do not overlap. You can consult the CSS specification for the details, but the upshot of it is that the floated elements will be placed as far left or right, which you can specify, and as high up as space allows. Okay, so I'll just show you a figure, then I'll explain. As you can see in this figure shows what happens when a series of sequential paragraphs are floated to the same side. The first three floats starts stacking up from the left edge, but when there is not enough room for the fourth, it moves down into the left until it bumps into something. In this case, the edge of the browser window. Okay. However, if one of the floats, such as P2 here, had been very long, it would have bumped against the edge of the long float instead. Okay. So now I am going to add some style sheet regarding to the float element. Okay, and with the source also. So first of all, I'll add something in the source. Okay, here you can see I have added 10 paragraphs, and for 4 paragraphs I have defined class equal to float. So now I'll apply the style sheet. Okay, I have applied for float class with float left, width and margin 0, and background is this color. And for normal paragraph, I have defined border 1 pixel solid red. So now let's save it and see what happens in the browser. Okay, so you can see here the underlying behavior. Okay, but let's apply it to something more practical like a navigation menu. So it makes sense semantically to mark up navigation as an unordered list, as I'm going to show you. But I'm going to omit the real URL values in the anchor elements to simplify the markup. Okay. So let me just add it. Okay. So now let's see what happens in the browser. So you can see that there are these links now. There are various approaches to converting it to a horizontal bar. Okay, but the primary steps are floating in the floating example are as follows. First of all, we'll turn off the bullets of the unordered list, and we'll set the padding and margins to 0. So I'm going to remove these, let's say this style. Okay, so what I'm saying is that, just a second, let's save it first and then let's see what I'm talking about. Okay, you can see that I have removed the bullets. The second thing is float each item list to the left so they line up, taking advantage of the multiple float behavior described earlier. So how you can do that? Okay, so now let's save and see what happens. Okay, you can see that they are now arranged horizontally. Okay, and make the third step is that make the anchor elements in the list item. Okay, here display as block elements, so you can set the dimensions, paddings, margins, and other visual styles. And you could set the style for other link states as well, such as hover, etc. But I'll keep this example short. Okay. this is what I'm talking about. Okay, so now let's see what changes does it to our web page. Okay, so basically it did not change anything that much. So the fourth step is that clear the element that comes after the menu in the document. So it starts below the menu. Okay, and just let me see what happens here. So as you now see that the links are horizontal. Okay, and at the very least you will want to add some more padding or margins to the anchor elements to give the links a little breathing room. But you can add any of the styles we have seen so far, which are colors, borders, rounded corners, background images, etc., to give the navigation the look you want. Okay, so this was all in the floating multiple elements. So now we'll move forward to the next topic, which is containing floats. As long as we are talking about multiple floats, this is a good time to address another float quirk, and that's float containment. By default, floats are designed to hang out of the element they are contained in. That's just fine for allowing text to flow around a floated image. But sometimes this behavior can cause some unwanted behaviors. Okay. For instance, I'll just show you one figure. Okay, I'll just explain it there only. Right. And if you float all the elements in the container element, as you might do to create a multi-column layout, there will be no elements remaining in the flow to hold the containing element open. This phenomena will be illustrated in the next figure, which I'll show you. The container div contains two paragraphs. The view of the normal flow on the left in that figure shows the container has a background color and border that wraps around the content. So I'll just show you that figure only, and I'll explain it there what I'm talking about. Columns. So far we have floated small parts of a page, but as mentioned earlier, you can also float whole sections of the page to create columns. However, when both paragraphs are floated, the element box for the container closes up to have a height of 0, leaving the float hanging down below. Okay, you can still see the empty border at the top. So this clearly is not the effect we are after. Fortunately, there are a few fixes to this problem, and they are pretty straightforward. One option is to float the containing element as well and give it a width of 100%. Okay, so how you can do that? I'll just show you the code. Okay, so this will be the code. Just a second. Okay, and the other common solution to take advantage of the behavior of overflow property, setting the overflow of the containing element to auto or hidden will also make it stretch to contain the floated elements. I have also added an explicit width value to address bugs in old Internet Explorer versions. But note that if your container element has a border, the 100% width will make the border hang outside of the browser window. Okay. So now I'll show you one more figure. Okay, which is the result of applying a containment technique to the previous example. So one trick I have told you, and the second trick is this one. Okay, and I'll just show you the figure only, where you will understand what I'm trying to say. So now this is the figure after we have applied a containment technique to the web page, so that you can see that it is not going outside the border now. Okay. So now we'll move forward to the topic where we'll use floats to create columns. So far we have floated small parts of a page, but as mentioned earlier, you can also float whole sections of the page to create columns. In fact, that's the way the professionals do it. There are a couple of solutions, and they mostly come down to a matter of preference. For a 2-column float, you can do the following. First, there are 3 steps. The first step is float one div and add a wide margin on the side of the text element that wraps around it. Second one is float both divs to the left or right. Third one is float one div to the left and the second div to the right, or vice versa. 3 column floats work basically the same way. There is just more calculating to do. Regardless of which method works best for your content or suits your fancy, there are a few things you need to keep in mind. First, every float needs to have a specified weight. Thereafter, you need to be very careful that you have calculated the weights of each column correctly, factoring in padding, borders and margins. Okay. If the total width of all the column exceeds the available width of the browser or other containing element, you will get what is known as float drop. That is, the final floated column will run out of room and get bumped down below the column next to it. The limitation of using floats for column is that it is dependent on the order of elements in the source document. The floated element must appear before the content that wraps around it, and your source may not always be ordered conveniently. Okay. So now we'll see some of the positioning basics. CSS provides several methods for positioning elements on the page. They can be positioned relative to where they would normally appear in the flow, or removed from the flow altogether, and placed at a particular spot on the page. You can also position an element relative to the browser window, okay, and it will stay put while the rest of the page scrolls. So now we'll see types of positioning, but before that I'll tell you the position property and its values. Okay, the values for position property are static, relative, absolute, fixed. The default is static and it can be applied to all the elements and it do not inherit. The position property indicates that an element to be positioned and specifies which positioning method to use. I'll introduce each keyword value briefly here, and then we'll take a more detailed look at each method in the remaining of this unit. First is static. This is the normal positioning scheme in which all elements are positioned as they occur in the normal document flow. Second one is relative. Relative positioning moves the box relative to its original position in the flow. The distinctive behavior of relative positioning is that the space the element would have occupied in the normal flow is preserved as an empty space. The third one is absolute. Absolutely positioned elements are removed from the document flow entirely and positioned with respect to the browser window or containing element. Unlike relatively positioned elements, the space they would have occupied is closed up. In fact, they have no influence at all on the layout of surrounding elements. The fourth one is fixed. The distinguished characteristic of fixed positioning is that the element stays in one position in the window even when the document scrolls. Fixed elements are removed from the document flow and positioned relative to the browser window rather than another element in the document. It currently causes some hiccups on mobile devices, which we'll discuss later in this unit. Each positioning method has its purpose. Absolute positioning is the most versatile. With absolute positioning, you can place an object anywhere in the viewport or within another element also. Absolute positioning can even be used to create multi-column layouts, but it is more commonly used for small tasks like positioning a search box in the top corner of a header. You can also use absolute positioning to break an image or chunk out of its containing box, creating hanging indents or overlap effects. It is a handy tool when used carefully and sparingly. Okay, so now we'll specify our positions. Once you establish the positioning method, the actual position is specified with 4 offset properties, which are top, right, bottom, left. Okay, so I'll tell you the values for these properties now. Okay, the values are length measurement, percentage or auto. The default value is auto, and it is applied to position elements. Okay, where position value is relative, absolute or fixed. The value provided for each of the offset property defines the distance the element should be moved away from the respective edge. For example, the value of top defines the distance the top outer edge of the positioned element should be offset from the top edge of the browser or containing element. A positive value for top results in the element moving down by that amount. Similarly, a positive value for left would move the positioned element to the right by that amount. Okay, so now we'll see first type of positioning, which is relative positioning. As mentioned previously, relative positioning moves an element relative to its original spot in the flow. The space it would have occupied is preserved and continues to influence the layout of surrounding content. This is easier to understand with a simple example. Here I have, in the example which I am going to show you, I have positioned an inline EM element. Okay. First I use the position property to set the method to relative. Then I use the top offset property to move the element 30 pixels down from its initial position, and then the left property to move it 60 pixels to the right. So this will be the style rule. Okay. And remember, offset property values move the element away from the specified edge. So if you want something to move to the right, as I did here, use the left offset property. So I want to point out a few things that are happening here. Okay, you'll see whenever you put it in your web page that there is a blank space where the emphasized text would have been if the element had not been positioned. The surrounding content is laid out as though the element was still there, and therefore we say that the element still influences the surrounding content. Second thing is overlap happens. Because this is positioned element, it can potentially overlap other elements. Okay, so this was all from my side in this tutorial. In the next tutorial, I will start with absolute positioning. So thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next tutorial.